is the approval of agenda and any announcements. I'll entertain announcements at this point. Okay, no announcements. Do we need to modify the agenda as it's currently printed? I'm assuming the document we just got in an email, Tim, for Act 173, we can do that in legislative update?
That was my plan, yes, Mr. Chair.
Okay, excellent. Any changes that we need to make on the agenda? If not, do we have a motion to accept the agenda as written for March 13th, 2025?
Motion, Sandra.
We have a second?
Yes, Gavin.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? The agenda is approved. Next item on the agenda is approval of the minutes for February 2025 meeting. Do we have a motion?
So moved, Aaron.
Second? Second with Gavin. Discussion on the minutes? Hearing none, all those in favor of approving the minutes for the February meeting of 2025, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries. We will now open the floor for public comment. And we have no one with public comment, so we will close the floor for public comment. And next item is the election procedures for the active teachers.
Mr. Chair, I'll take this one. This is we have procedures. These are the common procedures that we use. They're generally the same for both the municipal and the teacher system. And what it does is it set forth the process that we intend to follow to first publicize and seek nominations for both one of the active teacher positions and the active alternate teacher position. Both of those, that's Genevieve and Sandra's positions, are coming up in July of this year. So we've used this typical schedule to get to July and go through first the nomination process and then the a vote if needed. The only change from the last time we did this is we made a special provision last go round in light of COVID to accept emails in lieu of the petition signatures. We figured we don't need that anymore. So we went back to the typical signatures that we've used in the past, and this is what we intend to follow. So we would recommend to the board considering a motion to accept the regulations for election of member and for the active member and alternate active member trustee position.
Do we have a motion?
So moved, Aaron.
Second?
I'll second, Gavin.
So we have motion and second. Further discussion on the election procedure and the motion before us. Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries. Next item on the agenda, legislative update.
Great, and I'll take this one again, and others can fill in as needed. I wanted to address a couple of issues. The first is to follow up on what we discussed last time with respect to the funding of the PAAA. So as I mentioned last time, the post-retirement adjustment allowance account, the PAAA, which is the fund that is designed to fund a potential future COLA enhancement, one of the Act 114 provisions. The way that is funded is through extra money at the end of a fiscal year, if any. The first year it was in existence, there was none. The second most recent year, there was approximately $9 million that went into that fund. We're holding that within the teachers fund, but it's accounted for separately. In the Budget Adjustment Act this year, the mechanism that directs those funds into the PAAA and other places, we call it the waterfall provision because it puts extra money into certain defined chutes. And the legislature was initially intending to basically what we call notwithstand that language, which is the legislative way of saying we're not going to follow that this year, and we're just going to sweep all the money to other priorities. So when we saw that, we kind of raised our hands and said, we understand that that there's likely to be extra money, and it's typical for the legislature to try and appropriate everything they know about. But what we objected to was removing the possibility of funding this. And so they heard us on that. And fortunately, they changed the language in the Budget Adjustment Act. And so what that does now is instead of notwithstanding the waterfall language, ignoring the waterfall language, it just reserves the amount of money they expect to have in excess of the originally projected revenues. It reserves it into next year. So if at the end of the year, there is more, then the waterfall language still exists. So this is operating as it has always been intended at this point. Because this is the typical process they go through in the Budget Adjustment Act. You try and use up, whether it's this year or next year, you try and use up the money you know about. And it's only if there's extra on top of that it goes into the waterfall language. We will certainly be revisiting this in the budget because and everyone is aware of it. The budget is still to come, and by the time that's moving in April, May timeframe, we have a better sense than we do now about what revenues are looking like for the fiscal year. At this point, we only have through February, and fortunately, per the last revenue report, things are looking good. So, good news on that front. We managed to keep that one at bay, but we're still monitoring it in the budget, and folks are generally aware that there's an issue here now. And so I think we'll be involved in any discussions going forward. So I just wanted to see if anyone had any questions on that. Perry.
Perry?
Yeah, if you don't mind. Is it typical that the budget process run for 2 years like that, or by kicking it into next year, and then won't the legislature just sort of underfund some other things to make sure that money gets spent?
Yeah, the money that's going to next year is money that is in excess of what this year's budget is predicated
Right, I
on.
understand.
So I don't think there's any underfunding of this year, if that's what you mean.
No. I mean for next year. I mean this money that this little sort of spare change at the end of the year that's supposed to go toward the PAAA, if that's I'm getting the letters right, isn't going to go to the PAAA. It's going to go sort of into the general fund or into some sort of. It's going to go into some sort of other pot that's then going to get spent next year.
Yes.
And I see it that it's good that we didn't lose the language altogether. But if we have a mechanism to not give us, to not use the money for the thing that was negotiated for with Act 114, seems like it doesn't seem super great.
Well, I think it still is working as intended. There was the waterfall language doesn't provide a guarantee of funding in any year. And so what the legislature typically does in the budget adjustment and the budget bill is even if there's extra revenues that they know about, they appropriate them. And even if there's extra revenues that they don't know about but hope for, they do contingent appropriations. So last year, Gavin, was it like $180 million of contingent it was a lot of contingent appropriations in the budget bill from last year. And they said, okay, If we have an extra $30 million, it goes to this. If then we have an extra 20 million on top of it, it goes to this. And so they did all these contingent appropriations, and there was
Mhm.
still extra money after that. And that's why the waterfall kicked in. So
Okay.
whether they're appropriating it in this year or putting it to a use in a different years doesn't really matter to some extent, because they should be appropriating whatever funds they reasonably anticipate to have. And this waterfall provision really is and has historically been known to be just if something unexpected shows up at the close of the year.
Okay.
Yeah. But the key for us, and what we found objectionable, was you can't foreclose the possible. I mean, it's already, it's already kind of tenuous enough that anything will actually materialize, but you can't foreclose that opportunity, completely. That's what we thought was the fundamental objectionable part of it and why we spoke up about it.
Okay. Do we have a sense, of how much money has been rolled over into next year's budget so that we know what the waterfall piece would have been had they not moved it into next year's pile?
Yeah. What they ended up putting in is $133 million. Now, the waterfall, the part that goes to the PAAA, is only 25% of the total.
25%. So
it's not
25%
the
of the 133. Okay.
But that would, again, as the budgeting has typically happened, we would not have expected that to make it to the waterfall because we know about it now. So we would never have
I see.
expected that to be something like when they're closing the books in July and
Mhm.
August, it's kind of when funds show up at that time. So anything that we know about now, anything that we know about through the budget, plus even these contingent appropriations based on what we hope/expect might show up,
Mhm.
is
So
what
this-
we try
so-
is.
So this 133 is not left over from the end of the last fiscal year. It's just extra money that's going on throughout this year that we're in the middle of, and that we're making an adjustment for midway through the current year.
Yeah, that's right. The
Okay.
leftover money from last year, 25% of that was the $9 million
That's the 9.1.
that came in. Yeah, and that we have currently in the PAAA.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Other questions?
So that's that one. Then I wanted to just briefly note, because we just literally just got the email today. So I'm going to pull up so I can see it, the language that Bill circulated earlier. It appears that there's a House education, miscellaneous education bill going around that, and we don't follow, a miscellaneous ed bill. It's typically nothing to do with the retirement system, but this one piece that I knew, and I think I had mentioned to the board earlier this year, that there was one representative that had suggested extending the Act 173 program, which allows retired teachers to teach after retirement full-time and receive their pension and full-time salary. That program was initially a one-year program in FY23 that was allowed to be extended for 2 years. It was extended for 2 years at the discretion of the treasurer. And so it's set to sunset at the end of this school year. If nothing is finished, there's no possible extensions anymore. The bill that they're thinking of putting into the miscellaneous ed bill would extend it for another 5 years. And it would take out a provision that allows someone to serve in a 1-year renewal period let me say, the easiest way to say is you can't just keep serving in the same position. It's the point of this program was you can't come into this program and sit in it in the same position year after year after year, because it was initially designed as a sort of COVID emergency, we're having workforce issues. We want to put another tool in the toolbox for school districts to make sure that they can staff their schools. Over the years, we've had 7, 5, and 3 individuals participate in this. What that suggests to me is that the program was never one that was, there was never a huge need for it, but I think probably at the local school district, it did fill a gap. And, but at this point, it seems to be winding down. So it's not my expectation that we would support this, this bill. I think my recollection of the board's position the past time was not supportive. But we did make sure to design the program to the best we could to mitigate any economic harm. For example, an individual in this program cannot stay on our healthcare, and so it doesn't hit the OPEB funds. We get certain payments into the system, and the individual does not accrue further service credit when they're in this position. So we did take we took steps to try and mitigate the economic harm. But it is we can manage it, but it's a very human intervention program. Our system's not set up to manage an active teacher, be a retiree at the same time. So I would expect to articulate a position of non-support, but I also want to make sure that that's still consistent with where the board is. If the board has anything that they would like me to convey tomorrow, I will be going into House Ed.
So basically looking at this, it's the same Act 173 that was supposed to sunset. They have not done anything of substance. The biggest fear, I think you've already said it, was that they had that provision that we were hearing about that you could do multiple years. That's not part. I read this a number of times. I don't see that anywhere. So it's basically still the same 173.
It's the same 173, except they're now allowing someone to stay in multiple years if it continues to be extended. That's what that language that's struck at the bottom in sub 2.
Well, at the top though, so the period not to extend one school year and receive the benefit retirement allowance. In the first paragraph.
Yes. So the way that this program is written, it was written to be a 1-year deal, but then everything starts again if through subsection D it's renewed. So it's not to exceed 1 year, but then if the program's renewed again, someone can be in a position not to exceed 1 year again, if that makes sense.
Well, so what they're trying to do is blur the lines on this. So I get hired next year. I come out of retirement, God forbid, and I go back into the classroom. Frightening thought. But I do it. And then I'm enjoying myself so much, and they can't find a position. So then it's renewed by Mike for a second year. I could then stay on in that exact same position for a second year.
Correct. Under
Oh,
the
man.
current program as it works,
Right.
if Mike approves it, you would have to say take a different position. You could still do it in a different position, but you couldn't stay in your
Exactly.
same position. The point was the legislature didn't want folks just getting hired, and then if the program gets extended, just stay in the same position, because then you look a lot more like an active teacher. And it begs the question, why are we paying a full-time active teacher salary and a full retirement salary?
Absolutely. And I think, as you stated earlier, that this whole program was for emergency situation 1 year. With this current language, there's no incentive for the school district to hire. Although they do have to pass the straight face test. Oh, we tried, finding these positions. But again, I don't think that's very deep in terms of asking for validation that how many interviews they did and that kind of stuff.
To be candid, we have taken a posture of this that we are not opening up an investigation into the sufficiency of the school search. If a public official is certifying to us in a written document, we are taking them at their word that they're in the pickle that they're asserting they're in.
Right. Perry?
Well, I would add that I would hope that we could ask the legislature to make us whole for the pensions we're paying to people who are still teaching. I mean, it's not a huge amount of money, but it is a hit to the retirement system if we're paying a pension to someone who would otherwise be in the classroom. So it seems like that if the state wants to do this, they should find some money someplace else and make us whole for the amount that we're paying in these pensions. And I don't know that we'll get it, but I'd like to see that expressed because it is a hit. And as this program becomes established, I mean, right now it looks like it's petering out, but as it becomes established and as people kind of figure out that it's there and it can run for years and years, I think it'll become an attractive way to manage the end of your career to somehow take advantage, kind of jump through these particular little hoops and collect double for 5 years or however long you want to do it. It's a mistake.
In some ways, that's the ball game right there, because that's what we're most concerned about. And the minute that behavior is impacted, I think we're never comfortable with this program, but the fact that it was 1 year at a time, that the renewal was sort of just before the end of the start of the new year, and that it was 3 years in total, it couldn't really affect too much behavior, right? Someone's not going to retire early because they're banking on this when there is that much uncertainty with the program. The more you kind of regularize it, Perry, you're exactly right. That changes behavior. And I definitely ran this by Matt quickly. At the scale we're at right now, he would not adjust our, liabilities, but it's kind of decimal dust at the level we're at right now. But to the extent you went up a little bit and maybe you had a number of people in the 20s, you might start having to reflect this in our valuations, at which point that's a really substantial concern. So, we're definitely focused on that. And to your point about funds, we do collect things like the new teacher assessment. We collect the funds that the teacher contributions that would have been provided. So it's not everything, to your point, but we do have provisions in here where we are receiving funds from the schools, both for the OPEB and for the pension. So something's there, but it's not all of it.
Not all of
Dan,
it.
you have a question?
Yeah, I was curious about the maybe I missed it in the beginning. So the number of individuals is very small. Are they scattered across the state, or is it one? Do you have any idea? I mean, I'm just curious, is someone sponsoring this because their particular district is disproportionately impacted, or, I'm just curious. I'm not sure. I certainly think I'm along with the general consensus, but I'm just wondering, is there something in the background that I'm missing?
I will report this because I read it in the Argus. There is, I believe the representative from Barrie is the one that is advancing this legislation. And I believe there's a story about it that I think it might be the superintendent. I see Aaron's head shaking. There's someone that they want to keep, and this would be the way to do it. I mean, frankly, the other way to do it, the way that this makes sense in my head is that this is a comp issue. If the amount of comp you need is salary plus pension, so let's call it 100,000 plus 50% of that, 150,000. Well, it's a comp issue. And if that's what you want to pay, the difference here is that you only have to come up with a portion of it. But getting back to your question, Dan, in 23, it was Wyndham Southwest, North Country SU, Wyndham Central, Orleans Central, Rutland Northeast, and Rutland City. In fiscal 24, it was Harwood, Orange East, Rutland City, White River SU, and North Country SU. And in fiscal 25, it was Barry Unified, Mountain Views, and Springfield. So pretty scattered if you look at how it was used around the state.
Thank you.
Well, I think this is really dangerous legislation. Really, really dangerous. You know, to Perry's point, we have experienced this before years ago with districts offering senior steps 2 or 3 years prior to retirement, try to boost benefits in their pensions. So this is, I mean, I could stomach if it was still the same 173, that 1 year, that's it, you got to move to another position. I'm not in favor of that, but this is not good. Not at all. Other people's thoughts?
I will say it's kind of it's a slippery slope for me because I was pretty sure it was Berry City's rep over my superintendent. So I don't want to say too much.
Okay.
I'll read the article. Thank you.
So Tim, would it be beneficial if we had a motion of non-support for this for you?
Gavin, what do you think? Maybe would like to get your take on that.
Yeah, helpful.
Yeah.
Non-support or, opposition. I mean, it's sort of semantics, but I think it's
Right.
always helpful to know that, we can always say we spoke with the board, but if, a motion is concrete.
I'll motion non-support.
So maybe if I could just, may I articulate that maybe the motion would be the board moves to not support an extension of the Act 173 program into the future. Does that catch it?
Do we want to mention concerns about unfunded liability and stresses to the pension, or do we want to just keep it clean?
I think I'd recommend keeping it clean, and I can speak
Okay.
to the details perhaps when I'm
Okay.
testifying.
Perfect. Sandra, are you comfortable with that modification?
Absolutely. As long as I don't have to repeat it word for word. Yes.
Good. Good for you.
So moved.
Do we have a second? We need a second to move this. Gavin, thank you. We have a motion and a second. Further discussion? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? The motion carries. Tim, I know this is really quick that this has come up coming out of committee or tomorrow. Have you heard anything from Vermont NEA or School Board Association or anything? Superintendents?
Informally, I haven't seen them take a formal position, but conversations with staff at both the NEA and the school boards suggested that this was not something they were supportive of. I had
Okay.
not talked with anyone from the principals or the superintendents. I want to think those two groups might be the ones that would tend to be a little bit more supportive.
Yeah.
But I haven't had those conversations.
All right, thank you. Any other legislative updates?
They're going to change the whole education system.
Who is they, Tim? Who is they?
today. No, I will say I do continue to sit on one of the sprint teams for the edge that AOE has put together to when they start, when and if they get to the level of detail where they're putting out impacts on the workforce. I'm there basically to remind them that there's sort of the balloon phenomenon where if you squeeze on one end, you could be, not necessarily saving monies, but pushing them over here. I mean, we just talked about Act 173. So to date, that's been my function on it, just to remind folks that, that's a consideration they need to have, and I'll continue to advocate for that.
Yeah, I guess at some point, it doesn't have to be this meeting, but I'd be curious as to what, as we think about what they are doing, whether what's going on nationally is going to has any ripple-on effects, or what ripple-on effects would be useful for my education to the retirement system, if any. Or maybe the answer is unclear, and it certainly doesn't have to be, or maybe none. I hope the answer is none, but.
Yeah, some of the things I'm most nervous about are federal funds guidance. There was, fortunately, there's a rulemaking done recently that reaffirmed when a position, either teaching or at the state level, is federal grant funded, that the state can pull a generally applied pension amount from that salary to apply to the pension payment. Can I see that potentially changing? Maybe. But there was recently a rule that was completed, so that, as makes it harder to just change things on a dime. Obviously, funding issues for education generally are a big concern, but I can just say from my experience on the outside of the board, I have heard from folks that, sort of Title I or IDEA or some of the big federal grants that fund education, I think are, they existed before the federal agency of education. And so I'm not sure if people are terribly worried about that at this point. And I monitor the national, pension related news from our associations. And to date, I've not gotten anything, this is an urgent threat to public pension systems. I'm very attuned to looking for that, to be candid. So right now, some of the concerns, honestly, that I've got more in mind are the things that I'm sure everyone has when they're looking at their own IRAs or retirement savings accounts. Like what current policy, what the impact is having on the economy. Those are some of the things I'm most focused on. And but if you're hearing anything, I know our office is very interested in hearing it. I'll turn it over to Gavin now.
Gavin?
Yeah. Oh, thanks, Tim. Yeah, I agree with all of that. And, just wanted to, I think one generalized concern that I have, and I would invite all of you as always to, advocate in whatever channels you can for full funding of ADEX. Anytime there are other pressures on the state budget, those ADEX start to look like a big tempting slice of the budget pie. So, that is not due to any specific federal change, but to the extent any or all of the federal changes result in greater budget pressures statewide, people start looking for money, and the ADEX are large. So I haven't heard that specifically from anyone this year, but I just think we need to all be vigilant on that and just continue to impress upon people the importance of staying the course on those. And we'll certainly redouble our efforts on that on the treasurer's office end.
And then Dan, one thing that I've been looking at with the governor's proposal is that consolidation of districts means smaller staff. So there will be fewer teachers, which then has an impact on the pension because our active teachers are not contributing. So if the workforce drops, that will have a direct impact on us. So that's something that, as I've been reading through this and trying to follow, as difficult as it is, that's one thing that not only the impact that that has in the classroom, but also the impact that it has with pensions. So that's another concern that I've been thinking about.
And to the board's credit, I mean, this is something I think that I wasn't, we weren't thinking about all of the details that have happened recently, but the work that we're doing on the risk assessment, I've been conversing with Matt today and anticipate getting a first peek at, what he's thinking next week. We'll be looking at some of these items, what happens with the demographic change of X%. So I think it's going to help us get ahead of the game and sort of start to get our heads a little bit more data driven on, what happens if numbers change in a certain way, if returns either as a shock or persistently go in a certain direction. So I'm glad that we're going to have that work.
Absolutely.
I think
Any
if the
other-
DFR, oh, sorry, John, may
Go
I
ahead, Dan.
continue? Is that okay?
Yeah,
I mean, if the
absolutely.
DFR were, I think we've just, again, what we do with this information, I have no idea, but I mean, like we're trying to, we have a policy on as Gavin would well know, the insurance division has rules for like gender affirming care, things like that. Or even statewide contracting, of course, give preferences to female-owned and minority-owned businesses. Up until now, always thought of as a great thing. So we're just trying to internally, we're trying to identify, like, okay, are these now exposures? Are we, is someone going to be someone in Washington looking out for such things, and going to try to be punitive about them? No idea, but we're just trying to catalog things like that, which again, they're non-fiscal. It's not a major, I wouldn't say it's a major focus, but it's just something we're thinking about. I mean, I can't see us changing those policies. We certainly don't want to change those policies, but anyway, more speculative than anything.
Thank you. Any other updates, Tim?
I saw a divestment bill introduced, but I haven't gotten a sense that that's got a ton of legs. Nothing more direct to the pension system that I'm aware of right now. Gavin, am I missing anything that you're aware of?
No, and I think that divestment bill hasn't. I think literally nothing has happened with it. So
I think that's right.
Okay. That's good news. Well,
Yeah.
I hope I didn't jinx it. All righty, we'll move on to our next agenda item, disability recommendations for Bridget Tozy. Do we have a motion?
I'll move.
We have a motion to approve the medical board's recommendation for a disability. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Discussion on the disability? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion to approve the medical review boards for the disability of Bridget Tozy, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries. And last but not least, any other business to come before the board?
Staff.
All righty. I will entertain a motion for adjournment. We have a motion from
Second, Gavin.
Gavin. A motion and a
second.
second. Excellent. All those in favor of adjournment, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
aye.
Opposed? Go out and get some vitamin D in that sun before it disappears. And we got the blood moon tonight.
Oh, really?
Eclipse. Yeah.
Right.
To the northeast, if it's clear, theoretically, you'll start seeing the eclipse around 10 or 11 o'clock, and then 2 a.m. is the full eclipse, and the moon should be red.
Oh, right. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, Gavin, I'm gonna be
I'll-
sleepy tomorrow.
yeah. I
Really
think
did it.
I'll look for the pictures online tomorrow morning to see what it looked like. Have a great day, folks. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Safe travels, Perry.